The market that you are operating in today as a startup, is there still growth in that market, and do you want to take that growth? And sometimes you'll see companies, they move out of the market that they're really successful in, maybe too fast. Sometimes you see them move out too slow and they miss their next opportunity. So that's like one major consideration is like, what's your market penetration where you're winning? And is there more headroom there before you move to the next level? Because every level requires another level of investment. And obviously you need now more than ever is like, do you have a balance sheet that supports that? Do you have free cash flow? Like, what's your path to EBITDA? And these are all like major considerations now, especially in this economy, that your financial model stacks up to whatever investments you're going to make next.
Hi, this is Tetsuro from Off Topic, and we're here today at Stripe Tours Tokyo with a special guest. Eileen is here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you give a quick description about who you are, what you do, and what you're here in Tokyo for?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Stripe, and we're here in Tokyo today. Actually, we have our annual event. So we hosted nearly 600 Stripe interested users and prospects with us today, and we shared updates on what we're doing with our product, our roadmap, our investments in Japan. And we're joined by a huge Stripe team actually from the Japan office, but as well as from our HQ across our product and our go-to-market organization. And my role in Stripe as a Chief Revenue Officer is to spend most of my time out in the market listening to user feedback, speaking with companies who are thinking about building a journey with Stripe and really helping them on their journey and how they can monetize payments and drive accelerated growth for their business.
Yeah, let's dive in. What does your job actually entail in terms of like the day-to-day? And is the role of CRO at Stripe different from kind of other CRO type roles in other kind of tech industries or companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think Stripe is a very unique company, so no 2 days are the same. But there are a set of principles that we operate the business around, and our number one principle is around users first. We obsess about users. So for the most part, I spend a lot of my time listening and taking feedback from users, hearing what's important for them in terms of challenges and opportunities they have to grow their business in a domestic market, to grow their business from a cross-border perspective, and really trying to build a solution with them and with our teams on how we can help them on that journey. And there's two elements to how we help customers. And one is building a plan to accelerate their growth at the top line, but also driving a lot of efficiencies for them in terms of like how they run their business, how they think about going to market, how they think about acquiring customers, how they think about scaling their business, and that is like B2B or B2C. So a large portion of my day and week are sessions like this around the world where we do these kind of events, as well as just meeting customers in person, one-to-ones, spending time with the teams, and then internally spending a lot of time with our product team as we're very closely aligned, ensuring that I'm amplifying the stories that I hear in the markets and sharing it with the product so that we build the roadmap that is aligned to what our users need and want. And that kind of goes back to our user first principle, which is our number one operating principle as a company.
I think one of the Stripe's most recent kind of evolutions is this growing interest in working with enterprise customers. Obviously, Stripe from the very start has been focused on startups and entrepreneurs, but has now really expanded both in terms of product offering, but also just in general the customer base. How has that kind of shift changed, within the culture and organization in Stripe, or within just kind of like the sales strategy? Because it tends to be far more complex. It takes a lot longer usually to work with enterprises.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stripe is kind of unique, to be honest, because we want to serve customers at both sides of that spectrum. So we love the upstarts and startups. I mean, that's in our DNA. We're a founder-led company. And then equally, we serve like very complex large enterprises. We've been doing that for some time, but we've been kind of keeping it a secret. And I mean that genuinely. But like we've over 100 enterprise customers who do over $1 billion on the platform. It's like huge. And many of them who do several $1 billion on the platform. Some of those users actually grew up with us. So we obsess about the startup, and we want to be on the journey with that startup when they become a very large scaled user. And then others, we acquire them later on our journey or their journey. But like you're right, our go-to-market strategy and how we think about our users, we think about them very specifically on where they are on their journey, and then we map to their needs. So with that, for a large enterprise user, we have a different formation of account team. We might have a different set of partners in the ecosystem that's already working with that user, and we form part of that ecosystem. And the considerations are often a little bit more complex. Typically, these large enterprise users, oftentimes they haven't been in the flow of money before, and we're helping them to digitalize that business. And we really need to serve them in the ecosystem that surrounds them, and that means being like very familiar with their architecture, from their back-end ERP to their front-end systems. And what's really important to us, that we operate in an ecosystem, and part of that ecosystem is obviously partners. Many of them are here today. Partners like Salesforce and SAP and financial partners, and that for a user, when they make a decision to go on Stripe, we can integrate really seamlessly into their existing architecture, and have enterprise services that support that.
How has the shift and transition been? Because I think a lot of startups experience this themselves, where they start off small, medium business startups as customers, and then they really have to transition, and that tends to be a very big shift within the culture and kind of sales organization. Obviously, Stripe has done an incredible job in doing that. What specific kind of like changes, whether if it's within the team or the sales structure that you've kind of made?
Yeah. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that user journey and trying to meet the user at the part of the journey they're on. And what I mean by that is that we have a very focused team that are just dedicated to startups. They speak the language of startups. They know the incubators. We know the VCs. We know the ecosystem that startups operate. So that when the Stripe team engage with that startup, they're already part of that community.
Got it.
Equally, for large enterprises, we locate ourselves very close to that enterprise in their neighborhood, in their communities where they're operating and doing business. And we've dedicated teams that are very trained and focused on solutions that are important to large enterprises. We look at enterprises in multiple lenses. One is like, what industry are they in? What's important to them from an industry perspective? And not surprisingly, a media company has different requirements than an insurance company.
Of course.
So we educate ourselves in our ecosystem and try and serve for that, and obviously have the partner ecosystem that supports that. Equally, at large enterprises, they have different demands. Like, things are very different in terms of the products that you require if you're doing an insurance premium payout versus a subscription on a media company. And so we build our product to make sure that we're solving for that. And we take a lot of insights and feedback from enterprises to make sure that the solution is holistic and complete. I think irrespective of what side of the journey you're on, like my feedback to a lot of startups who are scaling up is like, understand and know where users are and understand where your revenue potential is. And that's your starting point. Where do you think you have an opportunity to serve a user and to make money and be as good as you can be, if not the best in that industry? And then stay very focused. The other area that we really kind of spend a lot of time on is like, what are our city strategies? What are our country strategies? And then in the US, what are our state strategies? And I think one of the things that can slow down a company as they're trying to scale is that they try and do everything at once. And we try and stay really focused. And at the heart of everything we do, we put that user in the center of that, whether that is in Michigan or it is in Singapore, and wherever that is, we try and show up in a very much a local, global way to serve them.
How differentiated is kind of the strategy, within specific regions or specific countries in some instances specific cities? Because I know today in the Stripe tours, there was a few like Japan kind of specific or Japan oriented kind of features that were announced. Is that very common within Stripe? Like, what's kind of the strategy like in a global versus kind of distributed kind of level?
Yeah, I mean, we think of ourselves as a global local, and the business that we're in is highly regulated. Like, moving money across borders is regulated wherever you are. So obviously, that's very unique to that market. And then very importantly is that payment methods are different. So here in Japan, the Konbini and JCB are very important.
Yes.
Not so important if you're over in France.
Right.
In France, it's Bank Cartier. And if you're in the Netherlands, it's Ideal. So like we really have to show up very local, but also very global, because many of our users are looking to serve the domestic market, but also looking to go cross-border.
Yep.
So those considerations are always things that we think about, we plan to, and we look to bring the solutions to users as opposed to, you know, wait to understand what the requirements or challenges are for them.
Got it. And then moving back a little bit to kind of, you know, SMB transition to enterprise, or kind of doing both. What issues have you kind of found, whether that's within Stripe or kind of other startups that you've kind of looked at, where the transition has been a little bit difficult? I'm assuming part of it is to do with, you know, understanding a customer.
Sure.
It's very different between a larger customer that's a lot more complex than usually a smaller startup.
That's right.
So what are kind of the biggest hurdles that you've found?
Yeah. What I see is probably, or can be classified under 3 pillars. One is your product. Is your product ready to scale? Things that we've talked about is like, okay, you could serve a small user that might need a product that is like 0 to 50 people or under 50 million processing volume. Is that same product going to scale you up to a company now that is up to 2,000 people and wants to do $1 billion on your platform? So you really have to get that strategy right on the product side. The other is on the go-to-market side. Like, how are you going to show up and what's your strategy? Is it going to be digital marketing-led strategy? Is it an enterprise marketing strategy? Is it account-based marketing? What does that look like? And they're very different models. Acquiring a user through an acquisition channel online is very different than acquiring an enterprise user, you know, in a very sophisticated industry. Different skills, different requirements, different cost models.
Sure.
And time to revenue is also very different. And I think that's one of the considerations from small to scale up. Like making sure you have your cost modeling well identified and you can fund your expansion. And then the third area is around talent, which is really important. And, you know, oftentimes companies struggle with this because you might have founded the company like with a great set of people and you're just so invested in each other. But the leadership team that might have got you to, you know, your first 5 million in revenue might not be the same team that's going to get you to 100 to $1 billion. And you just have to be really open-minded. And like my big advice to most people is, you know, go into your networks and talk to people who have done it, figure out what has worked really well, and just be very open-minded to, you know, what are the things that could help you accelerate your growth, and also that might be a, you know, detractor to that growth. Makes sense. Those 3 pillars make a lot of sense when you think through the strategy in terms of scaling.
Got it. And how can startups kind of navigate through those 3 pillars in terms of understanding like where they are at, right? I think with product, I think there's a general kind of understanding, you know, by talking to customers. But I think, you know, like the second and the third pillar, it's a little bit more like nuanced. It's a little bit difficult for startups to figure out if they're ready yet. What's kind of your advice in terms of figuring out where startups are at?
I think it really comes back to like, what does that plan look like? The market that you are operating in today as a startup, is there still growth in that market? And do you want to take that growth? And you know, sometimes you'll see companies, they move out of the market that they're really successful in, maybe too fast. Sometimes you see them move out too slow and they miss their next opportunity. So that's like one major consideration is like, what's your market penetration, where you're winning?
Got it.
And is there more headroom there before you move to the next level? Because every level requires another level of investment. And obviously you need now more than ever is like, do you have a balance sheet that supports that? Do you have free cash flow? Like, what's your path to EBITDA? And these are all like major considerations now, especially in this economy, that your financial model stacks up to whatever investments you're going to make next. So that's the second main one. And then I would say, you know, there's so many successful companies. And one of the things that we love about this space is like entrepreneurs are so willing to share and give time back. And, you know, part of what we do is create an environment and a network where startups and founders, as they're scaling up, can meet other successful companies. And not only in the market they're in, but like globally. Because, you know, one of the great things about the internet economy now is that it's like, it can be global first. So any market can be your market. Like the internet doesn't have a boundary. And we really try and make sure that we're fostering and supporting that kind of exchange and community across our ecosystem.
Right. And oftentimes I think what Stripe has enabled partially is the availability of a global first product or a company, right? Because oftentimes, as you kind of mentioned, there's a lot of financial regulations. They're all different in each country. Like getting payments in different countries is always very difficult. You have to find a new provider.
Yes.
But like Stripe is global in a lot of different places. So if a Japanese company wanted to go to the US, it's a lot easier for them. And there's obviously things like Stripe Atlas and things like that. But I think that obviously helps quite a bit.
Like we obsess about that. We obsess about, like, we really want users for it to be as simple as you go onto the dashboard and like, hey, I want to turn on Konbini.
Right.
Okay, because I'm going to Japan, or I want to switch on GiroPay because I'm in Germany. And you can do that in the dashboard.
Right. Right.
And like that's really important to us. We want to be the infrastructure provider so that companies can focus on their growth strategy and not worry about the back end payment and not just payment, but of course our subscription product is just huge because like we're in a subscription economy now, like never before. And that's been a huge growth driver for a lot of companies that never imagined that they could bring a service to market or a product to market based on subscriptions. And now, of course, like it's pretty prolific, and the technology that we provide lets you do that in an instant as well.
Makes sense. And in terms of, I think one other category between, small, medium business or like startups, enterprise, another big area is platforms. I think Shopify is a great example of a really interesting client of Stripe, where they power a lot of customers themselves through Stripe. And so this kind of platform for platform strategy, is that kind of on a separate bucket in terms of like how in terms of sales strategy there, or is that kind of engulfed within kind of enterprise?
Yeah. So we think about our users as startups that you mentioned, enterprise companies, and we think about enterprise companies predominantly being enterprise direct engagement with us. So the likes of like an Amazon or a Pepsi, these large BMW, Zara, large companies that we sell direct to. And a very important category for us is what we call SaaS platforms. And effectively, SaaS platforms are a distributor of our product. They embed Stripe's technology and they build on it and bring a service to market, both horizontally, like a Shopify, and then vertical SaaS platforms, which are like just growing so incredibly all over the world. And like we really feel strongly that this is the next wave of technology growth where vertical SaaS platforms will bring a solution. And that solution can be anything from accounting software like a Xero or Sage to an insurance platform for pet healthcare, and everything in between. And we're seeing companies can have multiple relationships with us. They could be a direct enterprise. They might have a SaaS platform business. They could also have a marketplace business. And that is really what the technology is enabling, is that you can have multiple different personas on this technology platform. These SaaS platforms are really important to us because it means that we can reach smaller businesses all around the world and remove all the barriers to obviously exchange commerce online through payments. And we're very excited about that. And our Connect product is actually built with SaaS platforms in mind. And that's like really, really important for us. And it's like materially how we think about our product development, and I suppose in every sense of the way we're trying to serve for that user all day.
Yeah, I mean, the ability to add in, apps on, apps or integrate more heavily with other third-party apps. I think that is an incredible move by Stripe in terms of figuring out not just integrating with other with bigger companies or with like platforms like Shopify, but also building your own ecosystem. In terms of the enterprise sales strategy, I think one interesting thing that I've seen some companies do, for example, like a Shopify, is that they use specific products as kind of a wedge in terms of being able to get to enterprise customers. So I think a lot of times it's reported at least that they use Shopify Pay, powered by Stripe, in order to reach and to integrate with enterprise customers, and then hopefully they could offer their regular other services. Does Stripe have something similar in terms of a specific product that tends to be more of a wedge than not, whether that's on the enterprise side or the startup side?
Like the journey that an enterprise is on when we meet them, and assuming we meet them later in the journey rather than when they were a startup, it really generally is around kind of two core drivers. One, they're on a journey to digitalize their business with a motivation that they think they can unlock market share and drive revenue growth, or two, that they can like drive a lot of efficiencies into their model. So from our perspective, of course, we want to position the full suite and platform of Stripe, our payments, our revenue and financial automated system, as well as our banking as a service system. And it just depends what is most important. Sometimes, you know, we will lead with our subscription product because that is what is the most obvious solution for that enterprise user. And, you know, oftentimes a lot of these enterprise users have like legacy systems and they come to us and they say, hey, you know, I've got 40 PSPs all around the world. I need to consolidate this into one provider. And they know we can do it because we're so global. And that is the wedge, if you will. It's like, hey, how do we unburden you of a lot of this legacy debt and managing like so many relationships in different markets. So they're on their own journey, whatever that might be. And you know, we think we have like a robust solution in any of those categories.
Yeah, I didn't thought about the global aspect as a good way to kind of as a potential entry point for enterprise customers because Stripe is in so many different places, right? Yeah. And a lot of companies, they're very distributed in certain places because they have to use the local systems of that place. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
And there's just a huge overhead in managing so many different relationships and technologies and integrations. And I think every company is trying to drive efficiency. So if you can partner with Stripe to do that and then put your resources to something like more revenue driving and value add for your users, that's really like what we're seeing. And on top of that, obviously with the explosion of AI, a lot of like many of these companies will never be able to build what we've built. So they will get a better opportunity and a market advantage by leveraging our technology and obviously consolidating or retiring some of the legacy stuff that they've been working on or had to work with for years.
Right. Well, let's since you mentioned AI, it's obviously a topic that everybody wants to talk about. So we'll just one question about it. You know, obviously there's been a lot of buzz about it, and Stripe I think is famous for being able to integrate a lot of generative AI within the company as well, not just within its products, but I think I saw on Twitter that you know, a lot of the engineers at Stripe have been able to use generative AI because there's a lot of sharing with internally about kind of best practices, best prompts to use. Can you talk a little bit more about, you know, internally within the organization, how, you know, the Stripe team is using it, and then also maybe a little bit on the product side as well?
Yeah. So we took a very open approach to AI internally, and essentially it was quite interesting. A couple of engineers over a weekend like spun up this platform and a recommendation that we should just make AI pervasive and put it in the hands of every Stripe to like play with it and see how it could bring some advantage to their team or their group or their business line, etc. So that just really materialized in just huge amount of like very really clever ways that we should do and work better. And that is everything from like engineering having kind of Copilot AI support on the dev to like one of the most used ones is that if you're like writing a communication outside of the company, you can spin it through one of the scripts and models that they created to put it in the tone of Stripe. And you say, God, why would you use that? Well, it's very useful for someone who's like brand new to Stripe and they're like learning the language and learning their ways. And then to a host of other things that you can imagine on customer support and answering queries faster, doing searches. And then of course, I think for me, one of the most powerful things is how we built it into the product, particularly for companies that might not be tech forward. With our natural language querying on our Sigma AI, you as a business owner who might not be tech forward and doesn't know how to use like SQL can just ask questions. It's like, hey, what's the next product I should drive a promotion in? How many sales did I do like in the last 7 days? And was there a significant delta in one market versus the other? Data that you would have had to have an analyst working on for a week prior. So we're seeing that is really where the value is for our users, that they can make more informed decisions faster. And that's why we've embedded it obviously as much as possible across all the products.
That makes sense. And internally, how, you know, what has been the process in terms of, you know, actually getting adoption? Because I think a lot of organizations, obviously Stripe, I think, is very different. It's very unique, but I think a lot of organizations, whether if it's in Japan or the US, struggle in terms of getting all their employees to kind of test and play around with it.
Yeah, not a problem in Stripe. I mean, Stripe is full of curious people who love technology. So I think one of the drivers for that, and maybe it's slightly unique to Stripe, we're so tech forward, but it was just to be so open with it and make it easy for people to have access to all of the different, by the way, models and languages. Of course, we have guardrails and governance around what people can do. But what we actually did was created a forum where people could promote what they had created, amplify that, and then it could get used across the business. So we made like AI heroes across the companies and teams, and I think that probably helped in like probably in not an insignificant way, and it was easy to do. Like culturally, it was easy to do in our environment.
And I think the Stripe engineering team building up those kind of internal tools, right? Like it's so much easier if I don't know what to prompt, right? Then I wouldn't know how to use it. But if there's a tool within the company that I just put in the text and it just puts it in the tone of Stripe.
Exactly.
That's great. Like I immediately understand how to use it, right? So I think you guys have built up a good kind of use case, kind of list that makes it really accessible. Kind of back to the sales strategy. I think in a previous podcast or a previous interview, you'd mentioned, when you were working with companies, enterprise companies like Lotus Cars or Zara, they were utilizing Stripe to establish kind of new distribution channels or potentially like complete new business segments. I think that is a very difficult thing oftentimes for startups to work with enterprise customers, because oftentimes like there's a lot of new requirements. The enterprise side doesn't know exactly what to do either. So there's a lot of like, talking and working together. How does Stripe kind of manage that relationship? And do you approach them with the proposal, or how does that work?
I mean, of course it varies, but like broadly what we're seeing inside of large enterprises, they're acting like startups within those companies. And I think it's partly because these large enterprises have kind of been disrupted in the past, and they seem very determined that that's not going to happen again. So like Lotus Cars, they had this use case and idea. It's like, hey, why don't we forget about the distribution channel and we're going to sell a Lotus car directly to a consumer? We're only going to do that online, and we're going to do it with Stripe. And like, that wouldn't have been a typical business model from a company like Lotus like 10 years ago. But within a company now, everybody is like, okay, well, why don't we try that out? That sounds like, something that we should really like push forward. As well as that, there's a real push for companies to have a direct relationship to the consumers. We're seeing this in the automotive industry everywhere at the moment. And that has been a real driver, because these enterprises want to have the consumer relationship, which they've been gated for, in many cases. The same use case with Pepsi Cola and Gatorade, where they sell directly online to the consumer, which they'd never have done before. You wouldn't even had an interaction with them other than you bought your diet drink or your drink like through a retailer or in a shop. So like, there's disruption happening within these large companies, within the companies themselves. And we're fortunate enough to be in the middle of those conversations. And then somebody like Zara, they were like, okay, we see our clothes are being resold on like third-party platforms. We want to be part of that recycle economy and create our own platform with our own brand where folks can come back and do that. And then they look to do that with Stripe. And, they spun that up really quickly. And that's the benefit of, doing a new business within a business, because you act like an entrepreneur in a startup and you move really fast. And we're seeing a lot of that in these large enterprises.
Got it. Well, I think this is a big opportunity in Japan, because I think, for example, a lot of retailers here, they've only done wholesale for the vast majority of their company history, and so they've never really had that direct kind of relationship that I think you're seeing a lot more companies in the U.S., especially the enterprise customers have. So I think this is another kind of huge opportunity, so I think companies like Stripe enable that and make it much faster and easier to do that. So going a little bit into organization and how that has kind of evolved. Obviously, you mentioned different teams that's focused on enterprise versus startups. Obviously, as you scale, it's a lot harder to keep your culture intact. how has Stripe kind of managed to do that, and how have you kind of managed to do that under your organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the hardest things for companies as they grow up is like, well, what happens to the culture? Do you try and hang on to the culture that you started on day one? Or like, how do you evolve it? And like, what's the mechanism to evolve it? We took a very deliberate view on this within Stripe and recognized, particularly as we were growing very fast, when you try and ingest like thousands of new Stripes into the company on an annual basis, you're at risk of diluting your culture and forgetting your DNA. So we went about a program of reviewing our operating principles. So Stripe is run on a set of operating principles. And we spent a really decent amount of time challenging ourselves if these were still the right operating principles. And did we need to upgrade them and update them? And we did. And we surveyed our Stripes, we surveyed our partners. We said, listen, does this serve our purpose? What would you suggest that we would evolve it to? So we have a set of operating principles for every Stripe. We have a set of leadership principles for every leader in the company. And we stay true to them. And I often think sometimes you go into a company and you'll see on their wall is like, oh, here's my mission, here's my operating principle. And then, you randomly ask somebody, it's like, hey, can you name your operating principles? And they're like, oh, they'll get stuck at one. And we didn't want that to happen. So we took those principles and we embedded them throughout everything that we do. If you come to Stripe and you're interviewed, you will be interviewed against the principles. If you sit down with your manager and you do a performance review, your performance review will be based on the principles. So they show up in so many different kind of mechanisms throughout the company. We've brought them to life in everything that we do, including when you walk into our buildings, they're like beautifully positioned on all of our walls. So you can't get away from these operating principles, and that's very important.
They're very embedded.
They're super embedded. And that's not to say that these ones will be the ones forever. Like, I think they serve our purpose now, and then they have to obviously grow and evolve as the company grows and evolves. But that is very important. And I think from a Stripe perspective, like, we have many sayings within the company, but like our number one principles is user first. Our second is move with urgency and focus. Our third is deliver outstanding results. And then we have principles that are around how you show up. It's like, be curious. Exothermic. We don't want everybody to be too serious in Stripe. So it's like, don't take yourself too seriously, So like, we want to embed those. And then obviously we expect everyone to role model those so that people can kind of feed off each other. So it's a very important part of like how we want to grow as a company. And it really is led, by everyone, but especially by our founders, Patrick and John. The company is super transparent, and one of the things that a lot of people are surprised in Stripe is that every Friday, Patrick and John do an open fireside chat with the whole company every Friday. And that is something that is consistent, and it really does create this connectivity to the founders within the company, that on a weekly basis you can ask them anything. And that's something that as companies grow, founders and CEOs kind of let pass. And we've kept that very much alive, and it's an important part of our culture as well. Like, it's a real signpost at the end of the week that you have that engagement with the founders.
Yeah, I think even that has evolved over time, because I think I don't know if this is actually true, but I think in the early days of Stripe, everyone was CC'd on like everything, and so like even like the interns like could see what Patrick and John would kind of talk to like customers about. So I think there was always this idea about this transparency, this documentation of a lot of different things that was very, very unique, and what made Stripe Stripe, right? In terms of the changing and evolving the operating principles, at what point of the organization did that happen? How long did that take?
We revised them, I guess, or updated them about 2 years ago now. And a very small group of us worked on this for maybe 4 or 5 months. And the things that I was trying to solve for as I was part of that group is that if you like randomly asked 10 Stripes, what are operating principles, could they tell you what they were? And for me, like, that's success. And that was like the end, like the mental model was like, what would good look like? Where would we be happy? And we'd be happy if like people were living and breathing these and they didn't have to think about them. They were just like part of like how we evolve. So that was that journey. I don't think there's any set rule on this, to be honest. In my experience over like 25 years in the industry, sometimes they need a tweak. And, you know, sometimes these principles like are good for a number of years.
Right.
Like, I think when you're in it, you know it.
Right.
And then, you know, I think from our perspective, we're very open-minded. Our Stripes give us a lot of feedback as well. So we always have a lot of input. Yeah, huge amount. And it's so helpful. We do a lot of surveying with our Stripes and seek their input and insights on what we could be doing better. And then we take action on that as well. And that like keeps us all really like living in the moment and making sure that we're on this continuous improvement journey.
Got it. And then you mentioned kind of the leadership team has kind of additional kind of principles. Can you talk a little bit about?
These are like openly published, so it's not like a private set of principles. But so like the number one leadership principles is obsess over talent. So, you know, we really believe that, you know, people are going to be a differentiated advantage for Stripe and for many companies. And we really want to obsess. We want people to come to Stripe and like have a really long journey with us. We want it to be a destination company. And we want to be very open about that. And that's why like obsess over talent is our number one. The other one, which I personally love, is that we expect our leaders to set the pace and energy. And that means that, you know, it's something that's required of you. And we think that that's very important, that you set the tone. And when we say leader, of course, you automatically think it's a people manager. It's that, but we think everybody has obviously a leader or is a leadership quality within the company. So we're very open with those. And equally, when we performance manage our people leaders, our leaders, we also talk about those. It's like, hey, how have you performed against this? What's been difficult? How can I help you?
Makes sense.
And we try and embed them to everything we do.
Amazing. Switching gears a little bit to Japan, you're here. I don't know for how many days, but what has struck you as you know being a little bit different here versus in the U.S. or in other countries in terms of the Stripe customer base, in terms of how business here is done, what types of clients there are,
it's just so lovely to be back in Japan. It's just such an amazing market. And we've been in Japan for quite some time and have a pretty significant investment here. We actually build product. We have product and eng teams here in Japan, which is kind of unique. And we're just like so committed to this market and excited about it. Like Japan is phenomenal and has a phenomenal opportunity for companies here to obviously accelerate their digitalization. And we think that that is just a huge opportunity. When you look at the stats around digitalized economies around the world, Japan has still a long way to go to get up to the global average on that. We see ourselves playing an important role in this ecosystem. And we're supporting users, the smallest startups. And I met with a group of them yesterday, actually. We had lunch with some VCs and startups. And I was like, hey, what's important to you? And it's like, hey, you know, we want to be really successful in domestic Japan, but actually we want to be a global player. So there's no lack of ambition in Japan. And I think that's like so exciting to see like these young entrepreneurs and startups and founders are not just thinking that they want to be successful here in Japan, but want to be on a global platform. And the world has gotten smaller. You know, before it was like, oh, I've never been to the Valley. No, they're like in and out of the Valley all the time and they're very well connected. So I think that's exciting. There's a lot of innovation happening here. And then obviously, like there's so many large enterprise users who are like global in nature. I just met with Nissan and you know, the innovation that they're building inside that company is phenomenal. So we're seeing at both ends of the spectrum, to be honest. And we want to play a role in those discussions. As well as that, we had a huge forum today with the partner ecosystem here in Japan. And like the room was absolutely full. And different types of partners, platform partners to services partners, technology partners. So we're excited about the ecosystem and the connector system and being part of that, but also trying to drive that forward. In terms of like our opportunity from a Stripe perspective, we're very committed and very invested to ensure that we're bringing what we're learning on our journey around the world to the companies here in Japan and sharing use cases on what we're seeing in other markets. And then equally important is that there's a lot of international companies that want to come into Japan. So like Shopify and like Uber. And we're really facilitating that because they need to come to the market and obviously have a payment platform and supporting that as well. So we see the growth on both sides, domestic Japanese companies as well as global expanders. So we're very excited. We'd obviously like to be growing really fast, and we'll continue to invest and obviously be part of a very vibrant ecosystem.
That makes sense. I think kind of closing out, you've mentioned before in an interview that you were a big fan of Charlie Munger. Obviously, Stripe Press has done a little bit in terms of publishing his book and stuff. But I think Charlie Munger is famous for having a huge variety of mental models, I'm curious, what are kind of mental models that you live by that you kind of take to your journey in Stripe?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fantastic book. Gosh, there's so many mental models that I use or that we use in the company, but I think probably one that I use most often is around like working back. So like take something which is like the end game effectively and working back from that. And that's just like particularly from a company perspective, from the companies I work with perspective, it's like, where are you trying to get to?
Right.
And then can you back into that and work back from that? And when I say work back from it, it's like work back from it from a data perspective, work back from it from a market perspective, work back from an inside out or an outside in perspective. And that's just been very helpful. And it also is very clarifying in terms of where you need to go next. And that might be a new product launch, a new country entry, a new segment, a new sector. And that is like one that we use a lot, and I use a lot certainly across everything, even in the career conversations and the mentoring conversations I have. I was like, where do you want to get to?
Right.
And people say, I want to be the CEO. Okay, let's work back from that. But it's a helpful, easy kind of mental model to kind of anchor on and then build to.
Makes sense. I think, the final point that I think that one of the reasons why I really like Stripe is, I remember Patrick talking, I think in some podcast about, and also at Stripe Sessions, which we were at, was about the focus on craft and beauty. And that I think is it resonates a lot with Japan, because Japan is a place full of craftspeople, right? Whether that's from like small mom and pop shops here to, all these different businesses that rise here. And I think it's pretty rare. I don't think it should be rare, but I think it is rare in the US tech industry where a software company focuses this much on the word craft beauty. So I think hopefully that will translate into having striping a good leader in that area.
I mean, we think it's like so important, and like we obsess about craft and beauty. And listen, there's lots of things that we're not at the mark that we want to be, and I think this is one where like there's kind of no finish line to it, because you're like, I've done it. Oh no, actually, there's always more. And I think we like the fact that there's no finish line on it, but it's very much in like the heart of the company and how we think and how we want to show up, and that our users are kind of, secretly delighted with our product. And it's not just the product in terms of like the technology, but the engagement and the experience they have with us wherever they interact with Stripe on their journey. It's really kind of fundamentally important to how we want to grow and serve our users.
Amazing. Well, Eileen, thank you for having us, and it was an amazing talk today.
It was so nice to meet you. Thank you.
Awesome.